Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Thoreau, and I'm the president of the Independent Institute. I'm delighted to welcome you all to our event tonight. As many of you may know, we hold these events periodically here in Oakland, our conference center. We feature notable speakers, and we have debates and panel discussions and other events. And tonight is certainly no exception. We're particularly delighted to have our old friend P.J. O'Rourke back with us. P.J. is going to be talking about his generation and his great new book, which is getting a lot of attention, called The Baby Boom, How It Got That Way, and It Wasn't My Fault, and I'll Never Do It Again. We're both card-carrying members of this illustrious generation. I guess it's our fault. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I'm wiggling out of it.
For those of you who are new to the Institute, hopefully you got a packet when you registered this evening. The Independent Institute is a nonprofit, scholarly public policy research institute. We sponsor studies in major economic and social issues. We publish many books. This is a copy of our quarterly journal, The Independent Review, which I know everyone's going to want to subscribe before the night is up. And our mission is to essentially advance peaceful and prosperous and free societies with a commitment to human worth and dignity, something that seems to be lost in Washington these days. Tonight, we, I think it's fair to say, face a rather unusual malaise that's been building. We've sort of moved into a realm of economic and political turmoil or havoc. It seems to be growing daily. Issues like Obamacare and the economic malaise itself, unemployment, government debt, spending, bailouts, cronyism, NSA surveillance of everyone's communications, and who knows what else. And the list just goes on. And the baby boom generation, in all its self-obsessed glory, as PJ has pointed out, is running the show. So what's that about? P.J. O'Rourke is, as I said, sort of a card-carrying member of the baby boom, is quite admirably now calling the baby boom to account for what it has wrought. As he notes, quote, "We're often silly and we're spoiled by any measure of history. At the same time, we have made the world a better place, not just necessarily in the ways we set out to," unquote. A founding member of our board of advisors at the Institute, PJ is really America's leading political humorist. He's the best-selling author of at least a dozen books. He graduated from Miami University, attended graduate school at Johns Hopkins, and has become well known in his remarkable career in skewering both the left and the right on the ends of his razor-sharp insights. He's former editor of the National Lampoon. He's written for many, many publications like The Atlantic, American Spectator, Esquire, Vanity Fair, and Harper's. So please welcome P.J. O'Rourke.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. I find myself in a little bit of an unusual position with this particular book, because normally my role in Independent Institute, standing up here, would be to give the bad guys hell, stand up here and give the bad guys hell. And that's a lot of fun to do, and I enjoy it. And the only trouble is that I'm giving the bad guys hell and they're not here. You're here. You know, I'm talking to the good guys, you know, and that made me think a little bit about that whole journalistic thing that we hear about that speaking truth to power stuff, you know. And, well, it's easy to speak truth to power when power is far enough away, you know. I mean, I can stand up here in complete security and say that Kim Jong-un, you know, you stink, you know, speaking truth to power. So anyway, tonight what I'm going to do is something that's somewhat different. Instead of giving the bad guys hell and making us good guys feel good about ourselves, I'm going to talk about a large group of Americans who are neither good guys nor bad guys, or are a little bit of each, or are both at the same time. And these are the baby boomers. 75 million Americans born between 1946 and 1964. And the fact that I'm talking about the baby boom and the fact that this book is for sale, that's just strictly coincidental. I just wanted to but I digress. There are 75 million baby boomers, and they are extremely important to those of us who have a libertarian philosophy. 75 million Americans who are right there in the key high voter turnout demography, who are at just the age, in their 50s and 60s, when they hold the greatest political power, the greatest economic power, even a very great amount of cultural power, adheres to people in their mature years. And this is also a generation that behaved in its heyday in a very liberation-like, a very libertarian, a very liberated, at any rate, behavior. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, you know, need I say more? So why the hell aren't they libertarians? I mean, why is this group of 75 million Americans, why isn't libertarianism their core philosophy? Why isn't it the dominant force in American politics, which we all know, Obamacare is there to prove that it ain't, you know? Now, I wish I could say that I'm going to answer that question. I wish I could say that I answer that question in my book. I haven't been able to answer that question. I know that it's not a matter of nutty old 60s ideals. Those, went out in the trash along with the bong, when I had to move out of mom's basement and get a job, I know it's not that that's just hanging around. And I don't know why the baby boom isn't more libertarian. I suspect it has something to do with what I think of as a three-legged tripod upon which libertarian principles stand. There are basically three legs to our stool, and that those legs are individual dignity, individual liberty, and individual responsibility. Well, now, speaking as a baby boomer, we were never all that good on the responsibility thing, which kind of leaves us on a two-legged stool. And I was saying that the other day, and somebody pointed out to me that the dignity part wasn't really our strong suit either. So this kind of leaves us on a one-legged stool, And so that's just, really as close as I can get, to explaining the phenomenon. I can't answer the question. And I'm afraid, actually, that the answer to the question of making the baby boom more libertarian, and I do not believe that it's too late to do this. I honestly don't. But the answer lies with each of us. Lies with each of us being logical, being respectful, and most of all, being patient in our attempts to convince individuals that every individual should have what, in fact, every individual wants in his or her heart, which is dignity, which is liberty, and which is responsibility, even if it's just for selfish reasons. We do want responsibility because we can't get rewarded for what we do unless other people know that we're responsible for doing it, So we want responsibility too. And so anyway, I can't give you the solution, but maybe I can sort of make the problem a little clearer. I mean, we, the baby boom, are the generation that changed everything. Of all the eras and epochs of Americans, ours is the one that made the biggest impression on ourselves. But that's an important accomplishment. Because we are the generation who created the self, made the firmament of the self, divided the light of the self from the darkness of the self, and said, let there be self, you know? I mean, if you were born between 1946 and 1964, you may have noticed this yourself, you know? Now, this is not to say we're a selfish generation. Dictionary definition of selfish is too concerned with the self. And self isn't something we're just concerned with, you know. No, we are self, you know. I mean, before us, self was without form and void, you know, like our parents in their dumpy clothes and vague ideas, you know. And then we came along, and now the personal is the political, the personal is the socioeconomic, the personal is the religious and the secular, the science and the arts, the personal is everything that creepeth upon the earth after his, and let us hasten to add her, kind. If the baby boom has done one thing, it is to beget a personal universe, and our apologies to anybody who personally happened to turn out to be a jerk. Because you see, self is like fish, proverbially speaking. I mean, give a man a fish and you have fed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, and if he turns into a dry fly, catch and release, angling fanatic up to his liver in icy water, you know, pestering trout with a 3-pound test line on a $1,000 graphite rod, well, at least his life partner is glad to have him out of the house. So here we are in the baby boom cosmos, formed in our image, personally tailored to our individual needs, and predetermined to be eternally fresh and novel, and we saw that it was good, or at least pretty good. I think we should have had a cooler name than the baby boom. You know, like the Lost Generation. That was a very cool name, I think, Lost Generation. Of course, good luck to anybody who tries to tell the baby boom to get lost, but nonetheless, it's too late now. We're stuck with being described as exploding infants. And maybe it is time, now that we have splattered ourselves all over the place, for the baby boom to look back and think, what made us who we are, what caused us to act the way we do, and as the kids say, WTF. You know, because the truth is, if we hadn't decided to be young forever, we'd be old. The youngest baby boomers, born in the last year when anybody thought it was hip to like Lyndon Johnson, the youngest baby boomers are turning 50 this year, in 2014. Now, we'd be sad about getting old if we weren't too busy remarrying younger wives and reviving careers that hit glass ceilings when children arrived, and renewing prescriptions for drugs that keep us from being sad. And we'll never retire. We'll never retire. We can't. The mortgage is underwater. You know, we're in debt up to the Rogaine for the kids' college education. You know. And this serves us right. Because we are the generation who insisted that a passion for living should replace working for one. You know? Still, it is an appropriate moment for us to weigh what we have wrought and tally what we have added and subtracted to and from existence. We've reached the age of accountability. The world's our fault. The world is our fault. And we're a generation, we're the generation that has an excuse for everything, you know, which I think is one of the greatest contributions that we've made to modern life. But it's still a fact that the world is our fault. And this is a matter of power and privilege demography. I mean, whenever anything happens anywhere, somebody over 50 signs the bill for it, you know. And the baby boom, seated as we are at the head of life's table, is hearing Generation X and Generation Y and the millennials all saying, check please. You know? So now, I had a little problem with this book. And the problem I had with this book was trying to talk about the whole baby boom all at once. I mean, to address America's baby boom is to face big, broad problems. Like I said, we number more than 75 million, you know, and we're diverse. And not only are we diverse, but we take a thorny pride in our every deviation from the norm, even though we're in therapy for it, you know? I mean, we are all alike in that we each think that we're unusual, you know? Now, fortunately, we actually are all alike in our approach to big, broad problems. We won't face them. There's a website for that, you know, a support group to join, a class to take, alternative medicine, regular exercise, a book that explains it all, a celebrity on TV who's been through the same thing, or we can eliminate gluten from our diet. You know? History is full of generations that had too many problems. We are the first generation to have too many answers. You know? And not a problem, as far as I'm concerned, because you consider the people who have faced up squarely to the deepest and most perplexing conundrums of existence. I would use, as an example, Leo Tolstoy. Leo Tolstoy, he tackled every one of the conundrums of existence. Why are we here? What kind of life should we lead? The nature of evil, the character of love, the essence of identity, salvation, suffering, death. And what did it get him? Dead, for one thing, you know, and completely off his rocker for the last 30 years of his life, you know. Plus, Tolstoy was saddled with a 1,000-page novel about war and peace and everything else you can think of, and he couldn't even look this up on Wikipedia to find out what it was about because he hadn't written it yet, you know. I mean, what a life. You know, if Leo Tolstoy had been a baby boomer, he could have entered a triathlon as a baby boom innovation of the middle 1970s. You know, by the middle 1970s, we knew we couldn't run away from our problems. But if we added cycling and swimming, you know. So to the problems of talking about the baby boom, let us turn our big, broad, yet soon to be firmed up, thanks to the triathlon for seniors that we're planning to enter, generational backsides. You know? And yet another difficulty remains. Most groups of people who get tagged by history as a generation can be described in a sort of an easy and an offhand way. They're folks sort of the same age, experiencing sort of the same things and sort of the same place, like the cast of Seinfeld or Friends, you know. You know, I'm pretty sure, as a result of taking modern literature in college, I'm pretty sure that Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, James Joyce, Gertrude Stein, Henry Miller, and Ezra Pound were roommates in a big apartment on the left bank in Paris during the 1920s. If that turns out not to be true, I give this idea for a sitcom, free to you members of the audience. But unlike most generations, the baby boom actually has an exact definition. We are the children who were born during a period after World War II when the long-term trend in fertility among American women was exceeded. And this excess began promptly in 1946 when the guys got home from overseas, and then it gradually tapered off until 1964 when American women were taking the pill or rolling over and pretending to be asleep or telling their husbands to go phone the Pope about where to buy rubbers, you know. I mean, well, 46, 64 is a long time. And distinctions, you know, distinctions have to be made among different kinds of baby boomers. It's necessary to sort them out. Now, geographical distinctions aren't really going to work for our generation because we moved around too much, you know, and distinctions according to race, class, gender, or sexual orientation, those would be offensive to baby boom sensitivities. And furthermore, they just really wouldn't work for me in this book because much as I want to be as completely different from everyone else as a member of the baby boom is supposed to be, I am in fact not. You know, I'm from the Midwest. You know, I grew up in an absolutely middle-class family. I'm hopelessly ordinary in matters of race, class, gender identification, and which section of Playboy I turned to first when I was 16. You know, I'm just normal. But so I'm trying to figure out how do I go about sorting the baby boom? And I thought, well, we're the generation that would never grow up. You know, we absolutely refused to grow up. And so what better method to use than high school classes was basically the way I analyze the baby boom. And the baby boom senior class, of which I am a member, we were born in the late 1940s. And we members of the senior class, we were on the bow wave of the baby boom's voyage of exploration. And yet, born when we were still very closely tethered to the previous generation, to the greatest generation. So in effect, what happened to the senior class among the baby boom was that we got keel-hauled, you know, we got dragged under the hull, you know, and we were left a bit soggy and shaken by the experience, you know. And so if we wound up as financial advisors trying to wear tongue studs, you know, or as Trotskyites trying to organize Tea Party protests, or both, you know, I think we are to be forgiven. I guess the best way to explain the senior class of the baby boom is just to point out that Hillary Clinton and Cheech of Cheech and Chong are both members of the, and I think if you average those two people, you come up with your basic senior class in the baby boom. Now the juniors were born in the early and middle 50s, and they were often the younger siblings of the seniors. And the thing with the juniors, makes the juniors different, is that when they were coming of age, parents were just throwing in the towel. Parents were just giving up on that big screaming match around the dinner table that had so marked their relationship with the seniors. And so the result was that the junior class pursued the notions and the whims and the fancies of the baby boom with an even greater intensity than the senior class. I mean, for the juniors, drugs were no longer experimental. Drugs were proven. You know? John Belushi was a member of the junior class. Actually, he was born in 1949, but I knew John, and I'm sure he was held back a couple of years, and so fits into the category. So the juniors were the teeny boppers, the groupies, the barefoot urchins over in Haight-Ashbury. Now, they hunted up some shoes eventually when they made their way to Silicon Valley. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, both born in 1955. But you may have noticed they never did find their neckties, you know. So then come the sophomores. Sophomores were born in the late 1950s. And by the time the sophomores reach adolescence, the baby boom ethos has pretty well permeated society. So sophomores gladly accepted sex, drugs, rock and roll, and the deep philosophical underpinnings thereof. But they had seen enough of the baby boom in action to realize that what works in general terms does not always work when the bong sets fire to the beanbag chair. You know? So the sophomores in college, the sophomores, some of them actually went to class. You know, some even sneaked off and got MBAs. You know. But it's the freshmen that interest me most, the freshman class of the baby boom, born in the early 1960s. They're different because they have no visceral feeling, they had no visceral effects from the events that formed the baby boom. You know, to freshmen, the Vietnam War, if they remember it at all, it was just something that was always inexplicably on television, like Ed McMahon, you know. It was feminism had gone from a pressing social issue to Maude, you know, a TV comedy show that their parents liked, you know. And Martin Luther King was a day off from work, you know. I mean, they just didn't get the whole what had formed the baby boom. And of course, this is a particular importance because our President of the United States is a member of this, and his wife. They are members of this freshman baby boom class. And I think one of the ways, you know, that one of the things that impressed me about the freshmen was something that happened during President Obama's first run for his first term, presidential run for his first term in office. And that was the kerfluffle about Reverend Jeremiah Wright. I'm sure you all remember that. Reverend Wright was the pastor at the Obama's church. He had married the Obamas. He had baptized the Obama children. And Reverend Wright was a man of, how shall we say it, strong opinions. Strong opinions forcefully put. God damn America, you know, and all sorts of theories about how the CIA had invented AIDS to kill black people. And, you know, the Republicans and the conservatives and the Fox News people just glommed onto this, you know. There's this raving maniac who's the pastor of this presidential candidate's church. And yet, it never really developed into a scandal. You may remember this. It never really gained traction. And the reason it never really gained traction is because we baby boomers, realized that while Reverend Wright was standing up there spewing all this stuff out, Barack Obama wasn't paying any attention at all. Not paying any attention at all. He's sitting in a black pew blackberrying, you know, with Rahm Emanuel. You know, it's all going right over his head. And it's going right over his head because he just assumes the world is bullshit. You know, I mean, everything is bullshit. And that's just, you know, bullshit is the ocean that we swim in, you know. The baby boom had, with its talent for BS, had managed, you know, to create this world that Barack Obama was perfectly at home in, you know. And now the American baby boom is, I think, in my opinion, it's the future of the world. It's the future of the world. I actually believe that everyone on this planet is going to turn into an American baby boomer eventually. This may take a long time, may take decades, may take centuries, but it is going to happen as soon as families get excessively happy, as soon as families love their children too much and are too permissive with them and are leading lives that are too stable and too ordinary and too suburban. I think the whole world will one day turn into the baby boom. Of course, that might not happen because, you know, the baby boom's not, like I said, the most responsible generation in the world. And, you know, maybe our style of extravagant freedom and scant responsibility and plenty of money and a modicum of peace and so on, that may lead to a rate of carbon emissions that will cause us all to fry or drown. I can't keep it straight. I can never remember whether we're going to fry or drown. You know, it was global warming for a long time, then it got so cold this winter, you know, that it became climate change. You know, because climate change explains everything that happens. So we may all die, but you can't have everything. And you can have a profusion of opportunity and at the same time a collapse in traditional social standards. And if you look around the world, say at Western Europe and the wealthiest parts of Asia and Latin America, they're almost as useless as we are, you know? And I mean useless in a good way, you know, with plenty of disposable income and ample leisure time to devote to pointless activities like trout fishing. And you know, another interesting thing to me is that these baby boom-like places around the world, they all seem to have the same kind of political deadlock, political polarization and deadlock that we have been experiencing here in the United States. And I think that, yeah, I'm a little, you know, if you've been researching the legalization situation in Colorado and Washington State, if you've been researching that as extensively as I have, it takes a little toll. No, you look at these countries, and you see them experiencing the same kind of deadlock that we are, and there's a lot of tut-tut-tutting about that from the pundit class. But it doesn't really bother me that much because I think political deadlock, well, Well, the Germans weren't politically deadlocked when they marched into Poland in 1939, were they? Japanese weren't politically deadlocked, you know, when they bombed Pearl Harbor. There are worse things out there than political deadlock. I'll give you an example more recent from our own country. Gulf of Tonkin resolution that turned LBJ loose to do whatever he wanted in Vietnam. We know how well that worked out, you know. There were 2 votes against that in the Senate and none in the House. So when we wish for bipartisan cooperation, let us be very careful what we wish for. You know, as I said, there are worse things than deadlock. And I foresee a day really when, and it's happening already in more developed places, when the kind of really noxious politics that marked the 20th century, the fascism, the communism, the Nazism that rose in the 20th century, that this just isn't going to be able to happen anymore. And it's not going to be able to happen anymore essentially for the same reason that my political science class back in 1968 just degenerated into an hour-long shouting match, you know? And the beauty of this was, the thing I really don't understand, is I can't remember what we were shouting about. Because the professor was against the war in Vietnam, we were against the war in Vietnam. As far as I could tell, the custodial staff was against the war in Vietnam. But we would spend the whole hour shouting at each other, because, you know, we're the baby boom, we love to do that. Explains a lot about what's going on down in Washington, too. You know, it's not so much deadlock as it is the pure fun of shouting at each other, you know. Economics, too, I think will get better because, you know, the ideas of central planning, of nationalization, of protectionist trade barriers, they're going to disappear essentially because everybody is going to be asleep in Econ 101 the way I was asleep in Econ 101. Right? We've made tremendous worldwide economic progress on the baby boom's watch, largely because we slept through Econ 101, so we're not affected by that. You know, there are still 1.3 billion people in this world who are living on less than $1.25 a day, less than $1.25. Less than $1.25 a day the way I was when I was selling pot because I smoked up all the profits. You know? And you know, one of these days, that 1.3 billion people, they're going to figure out that there is a better way. You know, in fact, I just received an email from Nigeria about a rather large amount of money. You know, that's needing to be transferred to an American bank, requiring only modest assistance on my part. And there will be no religious fanaticism someday. When the world is the baby boom world, there will be no religious fanaticism because we are a generation who listens to nobody. We will not listen to anybody, God included, you know? And, you know, I gotta think, I doubt God minds very much, you know, about us not bothering about Him. You know, because very few of the people that we've bothered, parents, college deans, the police, LBJ, attractive types in bars, very few have minded when we quit bothering them, you know, and I'm feeling God feels about the same way. World peace is probably too much to ask for, but we will never again have those kinds of enormous conscripted armies that were used to fight the really horrible wars, you know, over essentially World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. We'll never be able to get those huge conscripted armies together because everyone will have a letter from his doctor about how he's allergic to camouflage, you know. It just isn't going to happen, you know. And besides, war is about power. And there are many criticisms that can be made of the baby boom. But one thing that can't be said about the baby boom is that we're power hungry. We are not power hungry. And the reason for that, I would say, has to do with that responsibility that I mentioned earlier, because with power comes responsibility, and we don't really like responsibility. I mean, we're greedy. We're greedy for love, for happiness, for experience, for sensation, for thrills, praise, fame, adulation, inner peace, and as it turns out, money. And health and fitness too, you know. But we're not greedy for power, and I can prove this to you. I can prove this to you. Observe the baby boomers who have risen to the pinnacles of power in Washington, D.C. Now, we've come to a time in our lives, in our 50s and 60s, when politics really is our oyster. I mean, it is the baby boom that is running Washington, D.C. And I would just want you to take a look at those people in Washington and ask one simple question. The best and the brightest? I don't think so. No, the best and the brightest are over at Goldman Sachs. You know? So I have this prediction to make, an optimism, and a kind of statement that I would like to make to all the tyrants, all the despots, all the dictators, all the horrible people out there running the horrible countries that still remain in this world. And I want to say to them, you shall turn into baby boomers too. It shall rain on your Woodstock. You shall spend your treasure on disco, cocaine, and rehab. You know, your junk bonds shall default, and your dot-com bubble shall burst. You shall form overage garage bands and try to play Margaritaville. You know, your third spouse shall acquire an American Express black card. You know, with a credit limit higher than the U.S. national debt. You know. Your daughters shall wear nose rings. You know, your sons shall have pagan symbols indelibly marked upon their necks. Unless, of course, you belong to one of those cultures where daughters wear nose rings and sons have pagan symbols indelibly marked upon their necks, in which case they shall not. You know? You shall be perplexed by the internet. You shall grow old and addled enough to vote for Ross Perot in a presidential primary. There is no escape from happiness. There is no escape from attention and affection and freedom and irresponsibility and money and peace and opportunity and deciding that everything that you have ever heard is bullshit, you know? So I say to these tyrants, these dictators, these horrible people out there, I say, behold the baby boom, ye mighty and despair. Okay, that's everything I know. However, if anybody has any questions, I will make up some other stuff.
So Paul has the mic. So
here comes the mic fellow. We have a question right here. Front row.
This isn't about baby boomers. Did you go to all the countries you wrote about in Eat the Rich?
Oh, yes,
You
absolutely.
really
Eat the Rich and a lot of other books. I spent 20 years as a foreign correspondent, mostly in trouble spots, from the 1983 from the Civil War in Lebanon, 1983, until the Iraq War. I was overseas most of the time. Yeah, I think I've reported from filed stories from 40 different countries, almost all of which were, and none of the nice ones, you know. Ma'am. Wait for the mic. Wait, you gotta wait. You have to wait for the mic.
Sorry. What surprises you most about your children's generation?
Well, my children's generation, as far as I can tell, I think they've really picked up something. They picked up certain things from the baby boom, and mostly the good things from the baby boom. They are, you know, I mean, prejudice does not exist in the way that we knew about it as kids, you know. They're very accepting, you know, even embracing, you know, people who are different. And yet at the same time, a bit like the sophomore class of the baby boom that I talk about here, they are not, I think, as like maniacal and somewhat self-destructive as we baby boomers tended to be when we were at our most hormonal peak. I am a pretty, you know, yeah, they got too many nose rings, but, you know, I am generally quite impressed with the younger generation. I'm going to tell a brief anecdote here about, like, you know, but the change in, like, the nature of, like, racial perceptions. And this comes from I got a 13-year-old daughter, and when she was several years ago, she was about, oh, I don't know, maybe 8 or something. She comes home from school, and somehow at school, the discussion had come up in the classroom about adoption. And she wasn't quite clear on the concept. So my wife and I sat her down. We told her about the adoption process and, you know, what people do. And we said to you, you know, you've got friends who are adopted. And she said, I do. He said, yes, you have this friend, Bet Imhoff. And Bet is this wonderful girl. And she's got these German-Irish parents, little pink freckled people. And Bet was adopted from Ethiopia. And she is, you know, she's only about 13 or 14 years old. She's already about that tall and just gorgeous. And with that wonderful sort of sable, you know, shade of skin. And with her two little pink freckled parents, you know. And my daughter, Olivia, says, Bet's adopted? I said, yeah, we told you that. You know, about how, you know, the Imhoffs went to Ethiopia. And so she said, I thought she looked a little different from her parents. You know, and I mean, that's, you know, that's sweet. That's golden. You know, that's the world we want, you know. So, you know. Another question. Sir. Well, wait, microphone guy. Yep.
What's your thought about your comment about a number of years ago, another Washington, D.C. pundit and his professorial partner wrote a book called Generations, and a whole series of books after that about this interesting 80-year to 100-year cycle, and they talked about the baby boomers. They gave him another name. I'd love your thought about that and how that fits in with your take on the baby boomer generation.
Well, I mean, we do have these cycles in democratic politics, you know, in a democratic country. We have status cycles, and then we have retreats. Unfortunately, it's hard to retreat from a status cycle because once entitlement programs are in place, they're very, it almost takes a crisis to get rid of them. But the crisis will come, you know, so you know, we needn't worry about that. And we have polarization and more and less polarization. And people say, often say now, oh, Washington is so polarized, And I think, are they forgetting the 60s? You know, I mean, or how about 1861? That was polarized. This is nothing, you know. So, you know, but it's interesting, the generations of people don't seem to have so much effect on politics as generations of ideas. Changes in ideas seem to be really not the changes in the people who are around. Because with the baby boom, it's politics. You know, I earlier mentioned the mystery of why they aren't more libertarian. But I mean, it's even more mysterious than that if you think about it. We've had 3 baby boomer presidents so far: Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama. Now, if you plot them out, map them out politically, you would have to go to Pyongyang to find somebody more different, you know, from them than they are from each other. There doesn't really seem to be a dominant baby boom political ethos. But there are cycles in ideas, and let us hope we get into a better one soon. In the back, we're giving the microphone guy a lot of exercise there. This is aerobic.
That's good. There are these cycles, and you know, we came into the 50s and the 60s and the 70s with a tremendous amount of wealth.
Yes.
Lack of war, a lot of opportunity, and that gave rise to this whole baby boomer possibility for expansionism
Absolutely.
and thought and liberty.
Yeah.
To what extent do our own chickens come home to roost and cause that to revert back to what it was before?
Yeah, this is a worry, and it's a worry that actually doesn't have so much to do with baby boom selfishness or self-absorption or political misbehavior. It has to do with 2 entitlement programs that were just remarkably badly designed. And if you put those together with American demography, which has a huge lump of people, you know, now like just turning Social Security and Medicare age, because the baby boom, while it's 75 million, is strongly front-loaded. You know, I mean, it's the late 40s, early 50s are the largest numbers of the baby boomers, and they're coming down the python. You know, and after the baby boom, there comes a baby bust. There's a period where Generation X they're relatively, you know, scarce on the ground. And so what we're doing is we're creating a situation, and this is happening all over the developing world. I mean, Japan's got a much worse case of it than we do. We're creating a situation where we're going to have too many old people on too many entitlement programs being supported by too few young people in their most productive years. We're not feeling this so much quite yet because, for one thing, the baby boom has stayed productive, economically productive, longer than prior generations did, and maybe because we have been quite economically productive. So we can afford it for the moment, but soon we're going to be up against it. And the problem here, and of course it's a wonderful, I mean, it's had nothing to do with the baby boom really, it's a wonderful lesson in entitlement programs and the kind of thinking, the kind of deep thinking that one has to do before any entitlement program is enacted. Social Security would work just great if everyone would politely die at 67 and a half. You know, there would be just no problem with that. That would be a great system. At the time in the 30s when Social Security was created, they already knew, they weren't as statistically sophisticated as we are today, but they already knew that there was a long-term trend in American society of people leading much longer, much healthier lives than they had just a few decades before. It was foreseeable. The demographic difficulties of the Social Security system were foreseeable. They were, of course, quite a ways in the future. But the really sinful one was Medicare, because by the time Medicare is instituted, we really have a sophisticated understanding of demographics and so on. We have a lot of data. We know that that Americans are living much longer, and the idea of like suddenly giving all of them over 65 free health care for the rest of their lives, which may be another like 35 years, we know that. The other thing that we know is that the cost of medical care is going up. And the reason it's going up is because it's getting better, basically. It's getting much more sophisticated. By the time Medicare is enacted, the heart-lung machine has been invented. Open heart surgery is being done. A lot of other very advanced and extremely expensive medical procedures, and indeed drugs too, were on the horizon. So, I mean, the Great Society people, Lyndon Johnson, are just no living excuse for creating this entitlement program, which kept, you know, anybody over 65 basically from having any skin in the game, you know, and hence any controls on the price. So this is the main problem we're facing, and it's not actually a problem of the baby boom's making, but what it will be is a problem for the generations that come after us to solve. In one way, we carry blame here, which is that we have not exercised the political will to fix these things. It's going to be painful to fix them no matter how we go about doing it. It is going to be painful to fix them, but the sooner we fix them, the less painful that it is. And we have not shown that political will. There was a little blip when George W. Bush was elected about privatizing Social Security, making some reforms. And we've got an anti-blip now, you know, I mean, President Obama looks at Medicare and Medicaid and goes, hey, great, you know, let's make it 100%, you know, let's go all the way with the thing. So we as a generation have not exercised the political will that's necessary to do this. And you know, in fairness, it ain't the best way to get elected. I mean, if you think about politicians, you do, I mean, they're human too, you know, and it would mean them standing up on the campaign stump and saying, I can do less for you, you know? Whatever it is you want, I can give you less of it, you know? And that isn't an ideal way to get elected. Sir.
Paul.
So we've proven ourselves to be somewhat spineless when it comes to things like programs and entitlements. And do you think the next generation or two are going to find any more spine than we've found?
Well, I think I think the future generations are gonna have to find that spine. I mean, it's that or pay 60%, 50, 60% or 70% of their, of what they make in taxes. And that'll put some spine in anybody facing that, you know. So, you know, I think that they will. But it's probably going to require a crisis before it happens. You know, these plans will have to, there'll have to be a fundamental. Remember Al Gore running around talking about the lockbox, the Social Security lockbox, you know? There's no money in the Social Security lockbox, and there never was, because money is a government IOU, and you cannot save your own IOUs. That simply doesn't work. I mean, that's just like writing down on a piece of paper, it's like me making a trust fund. By writing down on a piece of paper, I get a bunch of money when I turn 21, you know. Social Security, same thing. It's just a piece of paper. It says, I get a bunch of money when I turn 65. The government promises, consult American Indians for further discussion of government promises. You know. So yeah, they'll have to have the spine. They won't have much choice.
Over here.
I believe you said earlier that you were somewhat optimistic that the libertarian philosophy was going to, I guess, carry the day eventually. But I'm wondering, how can you be so optimistic when the last 10 years what we've seen is pretty much the opposite, that Americans have been perfectly willing to embrace more and more government and more intrusiveness and more goodies. And
it's tough because, as we all know in this room, there are two sides to the libertarian argument. There is essentially the social side, and there is the economic side. And frankly, the social side's an easier sell. Although I am surprised, given the baby boom's attitudes, that it has taken so long for something like gay marriage to start to catch hold. But it's been remarkable how fast the change in public attitude has been about that once it finally began. Legalization of the sort of lesser drugs, the kind of, I'm not a person who believes that marijuana is harmless. I mean, we are going to pay a social price for legalizing it, but we're paying a huge social price for making it illegal. I mean, we're jailing all sorts of kids, especially if they're kids who can't afford a lawyer. I mean, we've got this whole generation of convicted felons out there, who basically did the same thing as the PhD students at the University of Colorado did, except that, they got caught, and because their street corner was a little more heavily patrolled by the police than the street corner in the University of Colorado. And so, we're moving. I think we've made, just in the past year, there's been remarkable progress on the social side of libertarianism. But the economic side is just a harder sell. It is a harder sell. And the reason that it's a harder sell is because of that bogus issue of fairness, which the president has been just awful about this idea of equal outcomes, I mean, you cannot have a free society with equal outcomes. That's all there is to it. And, the way, yes, there is such a thing as being fair. Every man and woman must be equal before the law. There's absolutely, that's fair. There are lots of kinds of fairness. But the way fairness is currently being used in politics is a lie, And I know about this because I've got a 16-year-old daughter, What do I hear around the house all the time? That's not fair, that's not fair, that's not fair. You let my sister do this, you never let me do that, that's not fair, So-and-so has this sweater, it's not fair, it's not fair. And one day I just snapped and I said, honey, you're cute, that's not fair. Your family's pretty well off, that's not fair. You were born in the United States of America. That's not fair. I said, darling, you had better get down on your knees and pray to God that things don't start getting fair for you, So, And I think, it's incumbent upon us to come at those economic issues a little bit more from that angle and a little less from the angle of, I want to keep more of my money and pay less taxes. Well, of course I do, you know, I mean, we all do, any sensible person does. But nonetheless, you know, we got to get across that philosophical, you know, that the fairness idea is causing a severe philosophical. That's good, yeah. We don't let you operate the light switch anymore, no. Yeah, they make him step away from that device, you know. Anybody else here? There we go. There's a guy who knows how to turn the lights on. Anybody else? Or yeah, sure.
So, especially in the Bay Area lately, with the Google buses and the Yahoo buses and now the ferries and everything else, and there seems to be just upwelling of anger and irritation at the well-off, and that seems to have traveled from the 1% down to about the top 20 at this point.
Yes, it does.
And it's moving further.
Yeah.
Where is this going?
Well, where is this going is it's going away eventually. But what happens during any major technological transformation is generally a good, I mean, you know, it's a good thing. Like, let's just take the Industrial Revolution as an example. We know now, looking back from 200 years, we know that the Industrial Revolution lifted millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people out of abject rural poverty and gave them a decent chance at life. But was it painful while it was happening? Did it cause dislocations that were, you know, Blake's dark satanic mills? You know, I mean, there was huge objection to this Industrial Revolution as it went on. And did it create temporary inequities in society? It did indeed. There were all sorts of relatively well-paid agricultural jobs that disappeared with mechanization, leaving people, you know, on their uppers, just as we are in a period where, you know, a decent paying manufacturing job for somebody with a high school education and no specialized skills is hard to find, you know. And people are mad about that, and you can't really blame them for being mad about that. And we have to take the long view. We know that in the long haul that this technological transformation is going to be good for everybody, but it's not going to be good for everybody all the time at every moment. And there is, frankly, no easy answer to that. You know, I mean, you know, we know that raising the minimum wage doesn't work, but it is a damn hard thing to explain why it doesn't work. I was just writing about that today. I said, because it gives hope. It gives hope. Raising the minimum wage gives hope because, you know, it gives hope to the unemployed because instead of not having a job that pays $7.25, they will not have a job that pays $10.10. But you know, so it is hard to make an answer to this, and will politicians probably try and do some element of redistribution? Well, our experience during the Industrial Revolution with the rise of the Whig Party in Britain would indicate that during major technological transformations, the government will probably step in, and the things that they do will probably be wrong and surely be expensive, you know, probably won't help the right people and so on, but we can kind of count on, and you know, it's, I mean, you know, it's our job to argue against that stuff, but it's not an easy job. What's my next book? I don't know. I got to live through this one. No, actually, I'm doing a reader. My editor pointed out to me that you've been doing this. He said you've been writing for, you've been publishing books and writing for 40 some years. You've been publishing books for 30 years, 31 years now. And he said, you know, it is time. You know, you have potential younger readers that are not familiar with you. You know, I mean, you've aged out of a certain, you know, group. I don't know if they read books anyway, but the idea is to put together a best of or a reader or something, and so that, you know, it's not that interesting. Okay, somebody would You tell the hilarious story about your girlfriend who came back for her ironing board. I'll do my best. This is, it's actually a long story, and I will make it as short as I possibly can. But I was at an underground newspaper. I was working on an underground newspaper, you know, as if this were illegal or something. A lot of stuff that we were doing was illegal, but not the newspaper, you know. And, you know, it's very anti-war and anti-capitalism and anti-this and anti-that. But it was also kind of a fun-loving little newspaper staff. And we were much more interested in testing waterbeds, really, than we were in the great issues of the day. So our office got taken over. Our office got taken over by more radical. This is in Baltimore when I was in graduate school. And there was a group in Baltimore that, honest to God, called themselves the Balto Kong, as in Viet Cong, the Balto Kong. And the Balto Kong came into our office, armed with like clubs and knives and so on, and said that they were liberating the place. They were liberating your newspaper. And we go, well, you understand that our newspaper consists of like this ratty townhouse that we're about 3 or 4 months behind the rent, you know, and like a $4,000 loan from somebody's uncle and like 2 typewriters, you know, and so liberate away, you know, it's yours, you know, go for it, you know. But that wasn't enough for them. They subjected us to consciousness raising. We were sat down in a circle, and they encircled us, and we had to self-criticize, and they yelled at us and screamed at us, and we yelled back at them, and I don't know, this would go on forever. And so they kept talking about how they were liberating this in the name of the people, you know, the downtrodden, and so. And mercifully, 2 of the people happened to stop by that night. It was like a neighborhood that sort of, whoop, there we go again. I told you to keep him away from the light switch. It's got this thing about it. Okay. So. You know, it was like a neighborhood, like little, you know, too many blocks from Johns Hopkins, but it was predominantly black neighborhood. It was a pretty tough neighborhood that we're living in. But there were these 2 kids that used to come by the office, and it's 2 big kids from the neighborhood, and they used to come by the office because they wanted us to publish their poetry. They were English honors students at the local high school, and they wanted to publish their poetry, which frankly, you know, like most high school kid, poetry wasn't very good. But there were 2 big guys, Philip and Levon, and Philip and Levon were, while they were English honors students, they were also dressed in a sort of currently fashionable Huey P. Newton, you know, 3/4 length leather coat, you know, and hat. And they walked in on this consciousness raising session, and they said, what the heck is going on? And the Balto Kong jumped up and ran out of the place. And so we were saved by the people. And I'm glad to say that thereafter we published all of Philip and Levon's poetry. What it was. And but when they did, when the Balto Kong left, my girlfriend went with them. You know, she'd gotten her consciousness raised, you know. So we're freaked out. We don't want these people to come back. So we say, okay, we're going to stand guard over the office. And I had this little .22 pistol that I'd had, I don't know, you know, since I was a kid. So okay, I've got a gun. I've got the little .22 pistol. And our staff photographer, who was a Vietnam vet, he had his service revolver. Or so he said, because actually the staff, I told you it's a long story, staff photographer turned out to be an undercover cop assigned to our underground newspaper, and he loved it because he got to meet all these hippie girls. And so, you know, every time, you know, we would periodically get busted for a little marijuana or something, and the charges would disappear because Glenn, our photographer, would go down, you know, to the DA's office and say, you're going to blow my cover, man. You're going to blow my cover. I'm undercover here. You know, you prosecute this, and everybody has to testify. You know, you're going to blow my cover. I'm keeping an eye on dangerous radicals, you know, such as the Balto Kong, which, you know, Glenn didn't happen to be there that night, so he didn't do anything about the call. So Glenn had a gun. Of course he had a gun. He was a cop. But he was a cop. He was in plain clothes. And, you know, this is 1970, 71, so you remember what plain clothes passed for plain clothes. He had like these orange bell-bottom pants and like a yellow ruffled shirt, you know. And he's got this .45 tucked in the belt, you know. And I've got this little .22 pistol in a desk drawer, and the desk kind of faces the front drawer. So we're guarding the office. We guard the office all night. It never occurred to us to guard the office in the daytime because we didn't know anybody who got up before noon. So we didn't. Nothing was going to happen before that. So we're guarding the office, and it's Glenn and I are guarding the office, and we've been kind of guarding the office through about 2 six-packs, you know. And we just come back from checking the refrigerator and make sure they were 6-packs were all gone, which unfortunately they were. And so we're just kind of standing around in the office, and back come the Baltocon. You know, the door flies open. We hadn't locked it because we'd had 2 six-packs. And in they all come. And we go, Jesus Christ, you know, they're back. And Glenn reaches for his gun, and he shoves it down the front of his pants. Pushes it right down the front of his pants. So Glenn is standing there like fishing around inside his orange bell-bottoms. I, meanwhile, say, my gun's in the desk drawer. I go, put the desk door open, reach in, and grab the gun, and I am so nervous that I don't, my thigh is against the drawer, and I can't get my hand out of the drawer. My hand's around the gun, but I cannot get it out of the drawer because my thigh is in the way, and it does not occur to me to move my thigh, so I'm rattling around with this pistol, and Glenn is fishing around the front of his pants, and the Baltocon are looking, I go, what, you know? And I finally decide, okay, he has a wooden desk, you know, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to flip the safety off, and I'm going to fire through the back of the desk because I can't get the gun out of it. And just as that thought had crossed my mind, the Baltocon kind of part, and there's my girlfriend. And she says, I came back to get my ironing board. This was a girl who wore nothing, and I mean nothing, but a, you know, tie-dyed muumuu, you know. What on earth she would need an ironing board for, I cannot possibly imagine. But sure enough, while all the Baltocon stood in the doorway, she marched upstairs and she came back down with an ironing board under one arm and a little Sunbeam, you know, steam iron in the other, you know, and marched back out, leaving Glenn finally fishing his gun out of the bottom of his bell-bottom pants, and me like completely shaken, still can't get my hand out of the drawer. You know? And that is the only time I have ever pointed a gun at anybody, and it looks a lot better in the movies, I got to say. You know? So that's the story of the. And that probably about brings us to the end. I hand over the podium to you.
Well, thank you, PJ. Your next book. Maybe, who knows? Those of you who have not gotten a copy, there are copies in the room next door. PJ would be pleased to autograph copies, more than happy, and you can tell him, ask him questions again about why he's responsible for all these things that the baby boom has been doing. Two things also I want to mention. One is in your packets that you got, there should be a copy of the article by PJ in the San Francisco Chronicle on Tuesday, which I'd recommend. Second thing is also there's a flyer in there about our summer seminar program for high school and college students, which we hold 1 week for each here in the East Bay and also in Colorado. So we encourage you to encourage students to apply for that. The last thing I'm going to mention is one of our research fellows who is in the next room, some of you may know him, is Anthony Gregory. And we just got word yesterday from the Association of American Publishers that our book by Anthony on the writ of habeas corpus, called The Power of Habeas Corpus, from the prerogative, the King's Prerogative to the War on Terror, just won the first place in the Prose Awards for Law and Legal Studies, which is quite an exceptional accomplishment. So our congratulations to Anthony for that. And I want to thank you all for joining with us to make this such a great evening. We hope to see you again soon. Good night.